Thank you so much. So as promised, we're going to have a final conversation this afternoon, which is a panel discussion on cybersecurity and automotive cybersecurity. And I'm very excited by the guests that we'll now be welcoming on stage. Our first is Jeffrey Massimilla. Thank you. Jeff is in charge of a global team at GM responsible for developing GM's vehicle safety systems, and as part of that leads GM's global product cybersecurity organization. Thank you. He is also, as I promised to mention, the chair of the Auto ISAC. Speaking of the Auto ISAC, we also are very lucky to have Faye Francie with us. Faye is the executive director of the Auto ISAC. And works with Jeff in that capacity. So I'll join you and excited to have this conversation about cybersecurity in the automotive industry. Jeff, I wanted to start with you. Based on your role inside General Motors, it's clear that it's an organizational priority for GM. I know it is for other OEMs as well. What's the driver internally? What's motivating that inside of these organizations?
Yeah, good question, Dennis, and good starting point. From a customer safety or customer privacy perspective, really the big motivations behind why a company has cybersecurity capability or cyber posture, it's the highest priority, keeping our customers safe, keeping their data private. And so really it's a risk-based approach. And when you have a risk-based approach to cyber and you're looking at the risks that you have, it becomes a top-down approach from the CEO and the board of directors, really driving it within General Motors down throughout the organization. And what that allows us to do is really have the right resources, well-funded, well-resourced organization that's able to create the capability both internally and then leverage partners, and I know we'll get into that in our discussion, that have great cyber talent and things that we can leverage to really create a great cyber posture for our connected ecosystem. And as we've talked about here today, AVs and all the AV technology becomes really paramount when you start to talk about things like that.
Great, and Faye, by introduction, we mentioned the Auto ISAC, but I didn't spell it out on purpose. I wanted you to describe that organization, which is focused on collaboration in an industry that is often defined by competition. So what is the Auto ISAC and how is it going?
So Automotive ISAC means Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And ISACs were established actually back during President Clinton's time in 1998 to do information sharing and analysis and collaborate with the US government, actually. And the reason for that is that over 85% of critical infrastructure is managed by private sector. So they wanted a mechanism such that the private sector could work together themselves, but also collaborate with the industry, with the government, and collaborate within the industry and across it. And so this is to build safe, secure, and resilient industries, to ensure that the overall health of the industry is good, that we sort of crowdsource, if you will, the information of what's happening. So when one company gets hit, generally these hackers and attackers will use the same tactics, techniques, and procedures to go to the next guy and the next guy. So if we share that information and we understand it, we can better protect ourselves. So collaboration across this industry is an imperative, particularly with what we've just seen with all these amazing technologies. This is really an incredible time for the automotive industry. And as Jeff has described, I mean, what they're doing, what many of the other members are doing, it's absolutely breathtaking. I mean, we are really looking at a transformation unlike any that we've seen, such as the Industrial Revolution. I think it's going to dramatically change. And as I think of 2050, I hope I'm still here then. And I look at 1950, which I can actually get my arms around, what a dramatic delta this is going to be.
Sure.
So we bring the different industry members together, and the automotive OEMs actually decided that it was a really important thing to do. And I'm sure Jeff would like to share it because he's one of the leaders that brought the other competitive OEMs in and decided that they needed to stand up an ISAC.
Right.
Yeah, so Jeff, how did that go? Because I know, unlike with other ISACs, there wasn't a big event or a driving force that precipitated it. So what did happen there behind the scenes?
Yeah, and it's an interesting story because we are an uber, no pun intended, competitive industry, right? So when I think of like Ford F-150 trucks, I just like scowl, right? Because General Motors and the Silverado is so much better. But all that joking aside, no. So really, what we, with the help, it was a great help of the Auto Alliance and the global automakers, is what allowed us to stand up the ISAC. And they were really the, kind of the ambassadors to get us together. And they do in a lot of different ways. But really what we saw as an industry, and obviously with the help of Bruce Allen Hamilton, who's sitting up here as well, who really helped us stand up the organization with your knowledge of ISACs, we saw as an industry the transformation in the industry and really the need to address cyber threats, not just within our own companies. And the companies are at varying levels of maturity. So some companies have a big push on this and some didn't have a very big push on this. But everybody saw the need to collaborate, and the collaboration would be in how do we get out in front of any cyber threats or maybe even fielded cyber events at one company before it affects the entire industry. And the importance of that is, we talk about it today here with AVs. How do people start to accept AVs and how do they get comfortable around it from the safety perspective? Well, if we have a major cyber incident in any company's AV ecosystem, then what does that do to the trust around AVs? So, you can take it to AVs, you can take it just to the connected car, but any way you look at it, it was paramount that we got together, we talked about and we shared cyber threats, and we matured so much beyond just sharing, and we can share that with you as well in this discussion. So.
And Faye, I know it started with the automakers, but it quickly expanded beyond that. So you can talk about kind of what the community that came together and is working within the ISAC now and who's represented within it?
Yeah, so it started with, I think it was 15 OEMs that actually started it and incorporated it thanks to the help of Auto Alliance and global automakers. And then we expanded it when I started to join about a few months ago. We brought in also the suppliers, and then we expanded that to heavy vehicles, including carriers and fleets. So now we have light and heavy duty, really class 1 to 8, I guess it is, that can actually come and join. And in addition to that, they can be members, but we recognize that the fabric of our community is made up of so much more than just those elements. They're made up of many of the elements that you saw today. Some of these strategic partners would include folks that you saw today talking about their technologies. We also look at academia. We look at the other trade associations that may be dealing with some of the policy issues that may be impeding and impacting our industry. And we also look at how can we really work together across that wide swath. So we built a strategic partner program. That program includes, not as membership, but as community partners, strategic partners known as innovators, which are those technology developers, navigators, which tend to be the trade associations like Auto Alliance, and then, as we call them, collaborators, which could be academia and or government. So we include all of them. We have a monthly community call. It's a virtual town hall where once a month we come together, we give an hour, sort of a tip talk. We talk a little bit about what we're doing in the ISAC, kind of where we are with membership, maybe what are the key highlights, what are the current calendar of events for the month, and then we bring in a specific tip talk, and we allow someone to come in, a partner, a member, to come in and talk for 30 minutes.
And I know today there's over 40 members, right? And it represents automakers, or their tier 1 suppliers, other service providers. And what's been neat to see is not only the relationship between competitors, but a relationship between a customer and a supplier in the OEMs evolve to where there's an increased level of trust. And I think the ISAC deserves a lot of credit for that. Jeff, one of the things I wanted to return to is your role inside General Motors for a moment, which is sometimes we hear talks like this and you kind of wonder what's beneath the surface, right? So I note that it's called a product cybersecurity organization, not a vehicle cybersecurity organization. I was wondering if you could talk about what that means for what you're tasked with securing and what some of those key program elements are that you have in place.
No, absolutely, and it's definitely more than just words, and that's really good that you bring that up, Dennis, because sometimes we do these talks, and it kind of comes off as, oh, there's this like magic that happens, and somehow cyber happens, or maybe there's nothing that happens, and we just get up here and talk about it. So it's funny because you talk about how it's not vehicle cybersecurity. We actually were vehicle cybersecurity within the organization about a couple of years ago. And what we recognized is we were on the verge of launching app shops and connected radios. We had OnStar in the field for a long time. We are on the verge of launching Super Cruise for Cadillac, which we have out there now, a level 2 autonomous driving system, and then AVs as well. And what we saw is there's a product ecosystem here. It's not just about the vehicle, it's about the connected ecosystem. It's about the telecom carrier partners, why they are in the ISAC with us. It's about the back office systems that touch or deliver content to the vehicle. And it's really about how do I look at all of that and understand, the attack surface, the threat actors, what their motivations might be, and then how do I have protections against that. So we talk about the elements. And we won't get technical in this discussion. My team can get much more technical than I can. But really, it's all about a three-legged stool for us. And there's ancillary parts to this as well. But defense in depth. So how do we defend multiple layers in our connected ecosystem with defensive measures to stop or slow people from getting in? And I say slow because you can never stop. It's never an absolute in cybersecurity. You can never be fully secure. It's about an appropriate security posture. So how do we have defensive measures and layers? How do we monitor and detect to know if someone's in our environment? And so we talk about slowing somebody from getting into our system. They may get past one of our defensive layers. The key is, if they get past one, it didn't give them anything. It was really hard, it was frustrating, it was costly and timely, but they didn't get anywhere. And then I can detect that they got past that layer. So then I can go to the third leg of the stool, which is respond to the incident. Response can be a lot of different things, but incident response is a key capability in a cyber program. When I go to the ancillary things, just to mention a few, because I think they're important, how do you look at risk? You can't protect everything in your environment ultimately. And we talk about this too. I can't have a Chevrolet Silverado out there that's $150,000 and it's the size of an RV because I have so many redundant systems in there. But I got to make sure that the safety of our customer and the privacy of their data is ultimately protected at any cost for the company and for the customer. So it's how do I look at risk? How do I do training and awareness? How do we collaborate? Because we aren't in a whiteboard drawing up our strategy ourselves. We're looking at other industries. We're working with three-letter agencies and defense contractors, aerospace industry, and we're learning. We're trying to apply those principles. So there's a lot more than that, but those are some of the key elements that are there.
Yeah, one of the things in working this over the last 5 years that we've seen change in the industry is we've gone from skepticism to acceptance, I think. But Jeff did mention that there's varying degrees of maturity. So the ISAC is a place for coming together and having discussions and sharing information, but it's also an organization unto itself that is trying to help the industry move forward. I was wondering, Faye, if you could talk about some of the efforts that are involved in pushing the industry forward that the ISAC's working.
Right. It is a very delicate subject to bring different levels of maturity together and really get to that common understanding of what we need to do to build the safety, security, and resiliency of the industry. So it takes time. And one of the things that we do also that helps, I think, is we anonymize the data, right? So we work with each of the members if they want to submit something, share something sensitive. They're not identified. We work with a member to get that information out such that they can learn from it and others can also apply the same the techniques. Now, having said that, we learn a lot when we do this, right? We learn not only from each other's unfortunate mistakes or incidences, we also learn from each other just from going through these specific activities. So one of the things we've done, and I think this is really amazing and our partners at Booz are helping us with, is to really understand some of these items and build best practices. So we bring together probably, 40-some companies together. I think it's representative of about 100 and some SMEs that come together, subject matter experts, that actually work on developing best practices. So we're actually just finishing our 4th guideline. One of our first ones was on incident response. We thought that was a really important one to start with so that if you're in the middle of an incident, you know sort of who to call, right, and what to do, and some of the basics there. And while these are best practices that are based for the whole of industry, they're not prescriptive, they're aspirational. And these have been really, really helpful to get everyone to learn about what they need to know and to learn what others are doing. So we actually are learning from each other. The most important aspect, I used to say, about the ISAC is really education and awareness, because this threat requires that in order to mitigate it, to thwart it. So these best practices really help the community come together, work this, and really define how do we do this better.
Great. And one of the things that's been interesting as the industry has taken this on is the degree to which a very confident group of executives and people in this space have recognized that they can't go it alone. So I was wondering, Jeff, if you could talk about the role that researchers play even beyond the ISAC, and then the partnership that's been developed with government and regulators around cybersecurity and automotive.
Yeah, and I'll talk from a GM perspective, but maybe try to hit a little bit from the ISAC perspective as well. It's really interesting, and it's just a good story. You know, when we were, it was about a little over a year ago, year and a half ago, when we were talking about, you know, how do we continue to mature our program. You know, we kind of developed the basic capability that I talked about, but what's the next step, right? And the next step was, we had researchers that were, you know, working with us. They were calling into our call centers, and they were trying to tell us things that they found. And, you know, our call center operators were kind of like, you've been hacked, or you're hacking something, like, we don't really know what you're saying. So what we recognized as we listened to these calls is we needed to figure out how to embrace the research community. And we did that through something called a disclosure program, coordinated disclosure, or a bug bounty program. And the importance of that program is, you know, it takes a lot, and I can tell you it takes a lot. When you go to, you know, the lawyers that maybe are in your organization and say, I want to invite researchers to tell me about how they hacked my products, tell me what they found, so then I can go off and fix it. That's like the biggest red flag ever, right? You want that information? That's scary information, and if you have it, you have to do something about it. Well, absolutely, we have to do something about it. That's about keeping our customers safe and their data private. So we developed a partnership with HackerOne, who's a coordinated disclosure entity out there that really puts a welcome mat out for researchers to come and tell us these things. We interact with them, we reward them, and we'll continue to do those types of things as well. But as far as government and you know, other you know, partnerships, really great partnerships with, you know, NHTSA and DOT on the work that they're doing in this space. Really great partnerships with other ISACs through our ISAC. And then also, I think I can't speak from the ISAC perspective or the other companies, but Homeland Security, other three-letter agencies, again, defense contractors and military installations. There's a lot of great knowledge out there, and it's really great to see the amount of sharing and willingness to share for everybody, because really it's a national security problem, right? Whether we're talking about a Chevrolet Suburban or an F-35.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Faye, in my experience, I think people would probably be surprised at the degree of cooperation that's happened between folks in DC and the ISAC and other entities. Do you have experience with that you want to share in terms of the value of that interaction from an ISAC perspective?
Sure. I mean, what Jeff was just saying is really powerful, right? So there's the National Council of ISACs, and that represents, I think, 24 ISACs across the transportation, critical manufacturing, communications, IT. That's a wide swath of the different sectors. And we share daily. I get 24 emails a day from these other ISACs, 23, on what they're seeing, what's happening in their area, because these attackers will use the same processes to actually come to another sector and start hitting it. So that's been very powerful. We have also just recently signed in the fall of 2017 a CRADE, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement with DHS, Department of Homeland Security, in order to have access to their top secret facility here in the DC area to gain additional intelligence on what's happening out there. All ISACs are invited to have a seat at that table. It really helps us. We have very strong relations with the FBI as well. They've been a really great partner indeed. In fact, we're working with American Trucking Association, who has something called the Skywatch program. If one of their fleets get attacked, they contact that program through the FBI and get immediate help through them. So there's a multitude of others as well. So the private sector working together and with government is a really powerful formula.
Great, and I know we talked a lot about today looking forward to a safer future, a more convenient future, and really a transformation in this industry. I think doing cybersecurity right today is about unlocking that future. But I also want to look ahead. So if we're, whatever it is, 2050, what does the cybersecurity mission look like then? Presumably we've done our sort of nuts and bolts, fundamental cyber work. What do you see as the emerging cybersecurity needs around that corner?
I think it's huge. Jeff, I know you have something to say about this, but if you look at 2015, if you were in the lunch meeting, the speakers spoke a lot about what 2050 is going to look like, and it's pretty much full autonomy, even though we're resisting it somewhat. as an industry. But I think overall you're going to see that to be real. And with all of that, all of those different lines of code, everything that's coming off of the terabytes of data coming off, how do we secure that? That's really important. So the OEMs and the industry coming together now is really an imperative.
Yeah, you started us off perfectly, because I think right now, this industry, every industry, is working like really hard to figure out what are those things that need to be done to make sure that there's an appropriate security posture, and again, customers are protected and data is protected. You know, the attacks that we see now, they could be different than we see now versus 2050. But I see the future of 2050, and it's funny, we've seen this like coined a lot here today. The idea of AI, something like AI cyber, right? That might be our 2050 vision of where right now there's a lot of invention going on. There's a lot of like just ideation to figure out what we need to do. The intelligence and the machine learning and the things that we will be able to do in that time frame, the understanding of the threats, the understanding of the threat actors, this should be able to be a little bit more mainstream, and just it happens itself. It's self-healing. It understands. It sees what's going on, and it protects itself. So I see a bright future. I see a bright future tomorrow with getting AVs on the road, but I also see a bright future in 2050 from a cyber perspective.
Yeah, I think we saw the AV car that handles getting cut off. I think similarly there'll be a smart car that's able to handle an attempt at intrusion and react and adjust in real time. So I want to thank you all, and thank you all for your attention. I'm going to introduce the closing speaker, but before I do, please thank Jeff and Faye one more time.